Let me sit so people can actually see me. Welcome to the fourth presentation in our Spring 2024 Sustainability Research and Practice Seminar. My name is Bradley Flam. I'm the Director of the Office of Sustainability here at Westchester University, and we are honored to be able to co-present this series with our colleagues from the Office for Research and Sponsored Programs and the members of the Sustainability Council's Scholarly and Creative Activities Committee. As I said, this is the fourth in a full program of 12 presentations this semester. For those of you who are here with me in person, there are copies of this program at the front of the room. For those of you logging on, you can find a copy of this on the homepage of the Office of Sustainability. We're easy to find on Westchester University's website. I hope you'll be able to join us for more presentations this semester. But in the meantime, please join me in welcoming our speaker today, Professor Mia Ocean.
Hi, thank you so much. I really want to express gratitude to Brad and Callie because you all do this work all the time to make this happen and create this space for community. And I loved, whenever I've attended these events, and it's like magic. I know you do so much work on the back end, so just want to say thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who shows up to these events on a regular basis to create this community and who showed up today for what is sure to be an amazing presentation. Let me go ahead and do share screen and try to get right into it. Okay. And then get up my notes. Okay. So we're going to talk about the role of humor in sustainability, focusing on well-being, equity, and community. And I am Mia. I teach both actually in the graduate social work program, and I teach research methods in our DPA program, which is really fun too. Okay. So to start, I want to go over a couple of disclaimers. So Callie and I have tried to do everything to make this an accessible space, but please let us know if we missed something or we could do something else. I'm going to be doing my best to read anything that's put in the chat out loud, but please feel free to let me know if I missed something. My slides typically have white, black, purple, blue, and a touch of green for the design. And I only have decorative images on them, but I'll describe them as we go. And again, if anything comes up or you want us to adjust something as we go, just let us know, please. I also have one content disclaimer. So I'm going to share the fact that I was abused as a child, but I do not share any details beyond that fact. So I don't want anyone to wonder or worry how far I'm going to go into that. Not far. I already shared it. That's it. I welcome you to share anything that you want, but just remember this is being recorded and these are usually posted on YouTube. So just be sure you're okay with whatever you share being kind of posted broadly. And then I do want to share one trigger warning. There will be an example of trauma connected to racism in the second half of the workshop. I have a slide that will give a trigger warning before we get into the example in case anyone wants to skip that portion of the workshop. Okay, so on this slide, there's a picture of a person laughing with laughter across their entire face, their eyes closed, and I feel like their joy transmits right through the photo somehow. And so my goal today during our time is to contribute to building community in this space and focusing on humor. To start, I'll share some information for about the first 20 minutes or so, including my orientation to the role of, orientation to the topic, and then to the role of power in humor. And then kind of for the second half, the last 30 minutes or so, I'll open it up to the group. I'll be sharing an example, and then I'll want to get your feedback and kind of your opportunity for you to share your thoughts and experiences with humor. And then hopefully wrap things up in a nice, tidy bow at the end. So to kind of start us off, I wanted to share this quote from a research participant. And please note, all the names listed with the quotes are participant selected pseudonyms. So Vivian shared, humor is a contradiction. It is both simple and complicated. And I tend to agree with Vivian. And during our time together, we will explore the simplicity and complexity of humor. Additionally, I use these 3 UN goals to guide the creation of this workshop. So good health and well-being, reduced inequalities, and sustainable communities. So my beginnings with humor therapy actually started when I was a child. I used humor as a way to cope with the trauma of abuse. So time travel with me for a moment because I grew up in the 1980s. And I used something called a VHS tape to record stand-up comedy shows on TV so I could watch them again. I also purchased something called a cassette tape to get Eddie Murphy's Delirious show, where he talks about Ice Cream Man. Some people may be familiar with that one. And then I cut out comic strips from a thing called a newspaper that would be physically brought to your home and came in like color on Sundays. And I put those in like a little photo album. So kind of all of these things ended up basically being tools in my self-care kit. So when I was sad or distraught, I would use one of these things as like a vacation, so to speak, from the abuse. They would get my endorphins flowing, help like improve my mood. And they were also a way for me to be mindful in the present moment, experiencing joy. Now, mind you, again, I was a child, so I didn't do these things consciously, but I just knew that it felt good to laugh. So intuitively, I sought out humor. Now, fast forward to present day, I continue to use humor now in my scholarship. On this slide, there's a picture of a person who's holding a balloon that looks like one of those smiley face, tongue out emojis over their face. And behind them are like graffitied, smiling sunflowers, just kind of bursting again with joy. So I've recently had these 2 manuscripts accepted for publication. The first one is entitled The Potential of Humor to Joyously Dismantle Ableism Plus, Considerations for Social Workers. And that will be published in the Open Access Journal of Sociology and Social Welfare. It's a first-person narrative. Basically, I describe how I use humor to implement the disability justice principles as conceptualized by Sins and Villid. The second publication was written by myself and Donette Gordon, who is a graduate social work alumna from our Philly campus. Our empirical article is entitled The Use, Harm, and Complications of Humor in Social Work, a Qualitative Inquiry, and that will be published in the Journal of Social Work. Within both of these manuscripts, and whenever we use humor, I think it's pivotal that we conduct a power analysis. So we need to think about who has the power in the joke. Who is the joke teller? Who is the focus or target of the joke? Who is the joke receiver or intended audience? And where does the power lie across these groups? I want to share 2 ways to break this down a little bit further. First, the non-scientific way. So in comedy, when someone's writing a joke, sometimes they'll use these terms to describe the target of the joke or kind of how they're framing it. So punching down is used to describe aggressive humor. This is when someone attacks or criticizes someone else who's in a less powerful position or could be considered to have less power. For instance, if somebody without a disability makes fun of somebody with a disability. In other words, a person who has more unearned privilege picking on someone who maybe experiences oppression. Obviously, this is an oversimplification, but we have 50 minutes, so. Punching sideways is self-defeating humor. This is when someone makes fun of oneself or one's community, but at their own expense. For instance, a person with multiple sclerosis, like myself, who makes fun of how they or people with MS lose our balance and fall down, or how we may lose control of our bowels. essentially poking fun at ourselves, but in a demoralizing way that reinforces we're less than abled people. Lastly, punching up. This could be described as a way to speak truth to power. It's basically like the opposite of punching down. It's when someone with less power criticizes someone in a more powerful position. And for this one, I have an example on the next slide. So I also work as a staff writer for the Squeaky Wheel, and that is a disability justice focused satire publication. So if you're familiar with The Onion or Reductress, it's like those. We write fake news articles that focus on disability issues, basically. This was not the first article that I wrote, but this is the article I wanted to write when I first began working for the Squeaky Wheel. So on this slide, there's a picture of a person ominously standing over a desk that has a lamp, prescription bottles, and for some reason, a typewriter on it. It's another 80s throwback, so we stay on theme. And the headline reads, "What's the magic ingredient in multiple sclerosis drugs? Billion-dollar profits." And so the target of my joke here are pharmaceutical profiteers, right? And my goal with this piece and kind of the larger article was to bring awareness to the absurdity of systemically unaffordable drugs and the profits for a select few. Now, of course, I use multiple sclerosis drugs. They ask us at the publication to write kind of from our own experience, but this is not limited to MS drugs. All right. So I want to share one more way to conceptualize power and humor, and this is through empirically based humor styles. Rod A. Martin and colleagues created these 4 styles, and I think it can be helpful for our purposes today to think about these on continuums rather than 4 separate domains, which is how they originally created them. So building on the previous punching examples, I've listed affiliative and aggressive humor on the same continuum. So at one end would be aggressive humor, which would include punching down, where you're laughing at someone with less power. At the other end of the spectrum would be affiliative humor with no punching. Affiliative humor is essentially humor that people connect over, so laughing with instead of at. Like when you share a joke with someone or a group of people, no one's hurt, no one feels put down. You're all like laughing together at the absurdities of life. The other spectrum has self-defeating humor at one end, which could be considered punching sideways and putting, oneself down in a way that lowers your self-esteem. And at the other end of the spectrum is self-enhancing humor. This is when we don't take ourselves too seriously and can laugh at and normalize the imperfectness of being human. And we end up feeling better about ourselves, not worse. Again, I'm oversimplifying a bit, but I want to share one more example to try to help make sense of these concepts. Okay, so this slide has a meme of Raven-Symoné as a child on The Cosby Show with a caption that says, "You could give me 67 years to do homework and I wouldn't do it until the night before." So if this meme is circulated amongst students, this could be a way to use the self-enhancing or affiliative humor styles, where people are not taking themselves too seriously and perhaps even bonding over their common experience as students with due dates. On the other hand, if I, as a professor, shared this meme in class to make fun of students, this could be considered aggressive humor, where I'm sort of drawing a line between professors and students. And I'm essentially using humor to exclude and exacerbate power differentials. However, this meme could easily be shifted to the affiliative humor style for the larger group by changing the caption to, "You could give me 67 years to do a project and I wouldn't do it until the night before," right? Like in this way, we could all bond over procrastination and everyone's included. And the way the joke is structured, there are not power divisions among groups. Okay. So I'm going to ask Callie if you don't mind unmuting in the room in case folks have questions or comments. I kind of want to check in. I know I'm throwing like a lot of information. And so I'm just wondering, are there questions or comments about the content that's been shared so far that folks either on Zoom or in Sykes want to share? Feel free to just jump in. All right, we'll keep going then. And we are going to kind of get into the application piece of this. So, okay. So these are the three major themes from Danette and I's research: humor as a tool, humor as a weapon, and humor as complex. For each of these themes, I'll share a participant quote and then open the discussion for you to share your experiences with humor. On this slide, there is a picture of a smiley face drawn with chalk in pavement, and someone's shoes are in the picture like they're standing there. And there's also an arrow drawn in chalk pointing to the smiley face. It's like, you are here in this happy place. So let's start in the happy place of humor. Humor as a tool. On this slide, there is a picture of two people sitting on a couch, looking at a computer screen and laughing. One person kind of has her head thrown back a bit. And like, I'm sure some can relate, right? You think about a time when you kind of have this physical reaction because something's so funny. I just love that. They're having a good time for sure, right? And hopefully viewing these things and thinking about these situations is getting folks endorphins flowing a bit. Anyway, to illustrate one way that humor can be used as a tool, I want to share a quote from Mrs. Apple. She wrote, "Laughter can reduce feelings of stress, worry, and anxiety, no matter how briefly. A good laugh ought to be prescribed, especially for those who work in highly stressful, demanding, and taxing jobs. This can lower the gauge on our stress and anxiety scale. While the issues still exist, our mindset and spirit are lightened, if only for a moment, giving us what we need to go back in and finish the job." So to me, this quote directly addresses how to keep difficult social justice work sustainable, right? Like taking these breaks, taking these pauses. But I want to learn about your thoughts and experiences, and whether, like I used kind of in my example, or Mrs. Apple, of the idea of like this vacation or taking a break, but also like we can broaden it to like affiliative humor. I'm just kind of curious, how do folks use humor in their lives now or in their work, if you'd be willing to share a bit of your examples? Yeah, Cheryl, please.
Hi. I just also want to comment that by you narrating the slides, it's also allowing me to make my lunch and wash some dishes. So it's a very helpful kind of, ableist for, I don't know, like overproduction. Anyhow, so I need to use it when I make mistakes, right? Because I make a lot of them. And so using humor helps me laugh at myself and realize it isn't too serious. We're all going to get through this. We all make mistakes. So.
Yeah, that's a great example, Cheryl. And I appreciate you sharing like that universal design kind of worked, right? So that you could multitask. And it's such a good point. We can be so hard on ourselves when we make mistakes and hold ourselves to such a high standard that it can hinder us, right? But by being able to laugh at ourselves and like, it's like, oh, so I am human, right? I am imperfect. I love it. It's a great example. Thank you, Cheryl. Appreciate it. Yes, Angel.
Um, Humor is a big part of who I am, and I love when you said about the stand-up comedian. I think I wanted to be one. That is my alter ego. I have always used humor and more in the States to kind of heal or protect myself for discrimination. The way that I sound, the way that I think, the way that I look, and I use it. Your lectures to now make me more mindful of how I'm using it. So It seems like I am doing it to the punching sideways, because I was said we blah 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 such and so. So that was very curious, but it's how I heal of all the isms that are out there. Humor is how I may follow myself to don't take it serious, even though sometimes hurt, but it gives me that,
Yes.
Thank you for listening.
No, thank you. And I called you Angel because I heard Brad call you that. Is that your preferred first name? Oh, sorry, you're muted now.
It's Diana, but Angel is so good.
No, that's okay. Because I was gonna say Deanna, but then I heard Brad, so
Yeah,
I'm gonna
it's
throw
Diana,
Brad
yeah.
under the bus.
Yes,
Thank you.
he called me Angel since he met me, yeah, but it's good. I'm an angel.
This is
I'm an
true.
angel. This is the humor.
I love it. No, thank you, Diana. And let me tell you, I feel like I hear what you're saying. And I think, right, it is complicated thinking about like punching sideways. Or I wonder if part of what you're doing is kind of objectifying the isms, like keeping them separate from yourself, like as a way of, instead of internalizing them, it's like, that's ridiculous. So I'm going to like make fun of that and keep that a little bit at bay because that's yours and that's your ridiculousness. And I'm an angel over here. You can do that over there. So just, as you kind of like keep thinking about it and teasing it out a little bit. And thank you for sharing that example. And we have something on the next slide too that I'd be curious to get your take on a little bit too. And let me just double check in the chat. So Keston talks about helps me stay flexible and adaptable, and most important, a more memorable moment in training. What better way to laugh at your mistake? Hey, everybody does it. Exactly, right? Exactly. Yeah, Casey.
I think I always struggle with whether the line between like humor to cope and when it becomes mean-spirited. So right now I'm part of this organization that's having some financial trouble, and the board is saying things are okay, we're working on it. But then like one of the board members has gone rogue, and so there's this e-forum for the organization. And so the treasurer's gone rogue and everyone is like, things are ending. And so people have started writing "Stop the Bleeding," and they're like all in caps and are like freaking out that like the organization is coming to an end, and it just seems really extreme. So myself and another person have been joking about it, and she made like a sweatshirt that said "Stop the Bleeding" and was like, maybe this is how we save the organization as we sell this sweatshirt. But then we thought like people are like actually like serious about how concerned they are, but for us it feels like so out of proportion, and also to some extent mean spirit in their own way and how they're targeting the board. So I think I often use humor to cope, but I'm never sure. I don't know, I'll leave it there. I don't know if you know what I'm saying.
Totally. And it's like thinking about the context and like what assumptions can be embedded in the jokes. Like, are we assuming that we all view this thing the same way, right? And like that's the complicated. That's a great example of how complicated it is. And like question like, yeah, am I using this in a way that's okay? It's tricky. I think it's really tricky. Just want to check in too in Sykes in case anyone has tried to pop in and we haven't heard you.
No, I think we're all just enjoying listening and laughing along with you guys.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, let's keep going. I'll go back to the slides and let's look at another quote and then we'll come back to the discussion. All right. Yes, and thank you everyone, including Keston who jumped into the chat there. This is great. All right. So now we're going to get into the darker side, the more serious side of the topic, how humor can be weaponized. And this is the part where I want to issue a trigger warning. On the next slide, a participant shares an example where she experienced trauma connected to racism. So I'm going to take a minute to describe the image on the slide, and this will simultaneously give folks an opportunity if they want to take a break. So this slide has a heart that's made up of broken pieces and a centerpiece is missing, but the heart's lit up kind of from the inside out. All right, let's go to the next slide. So Sheila shared her experience this way. Humor becomes oppressive when one uses their power to dominate. Many people, when confronted after saying something offensive, usually claim it was a joke. I previously experienced oppressive humor in the workplace. I was discussing with a few colleagues how stressful all of our workload was, but somehow I was singled out. I was told by one of my colleagues that the workload might have been too much for me, and I should have considered the janitor position instead. Everyone laughed, And after they noticed I wasn't laughing, there was an awkward silence in the room. That joke was not funny and uncomfortable for me because I was the only African American amongst my colleagues in that setting. I felt as though that joke could have been targeted at anybody, but because he made sure he said it to me, I felt as though he wanted to single me out because I was a part of the non-dominant group. So in this quote, Sheila describes her colleague and how he used aggressive humor to harm her and exclude her from the group. So I want to open it up again for dialogue, but I just want to be clear. I don't want us to debate Sheila's experience, in part because she's not here, and in part, her experience is her truth. And I ask that we simply honor that and her generosity for sharing it with us. So I'm wondering if anyone needs space to share example of how you've witnessed or experienced humor being weaponized in aggressive or exclusionary ways. I don't feel like we always have a space to talk about it, so we can create that here. Or if you'd rather, we could focus on talking about how to disarm humor in these situations when it has been weaponized, so that we can think about how to stop and focus more on our community. So again, I want to just open it up for anyone who might want to share. Yeah, please, Diana.
So I am from Colombia, born and raised in Colombia. So often there is an assumption that we are very connected to the world of drugs, and specific with Pablo Escobar. So doesn't happen often because I learned how to stop it, but usually people will say, "Are you cousin of Pablo Escobar?" So Colombian, "Are you cousin of Pablo Escobar?" Or if there was a joke of drugs, they will look and say, "Hey, as Diana," all these things, and so I will, or the faces will go to me. So like Sheila, I felt like I was the only Colombian. I was the things, and when you have that heart of the trauma, when specific in the USA, people make jokes about Pablo Escobar, they do not understand why we lived there. I lived during that time. I lived through a terror. As a young adult, I saw pieces of body lumps because of this war. So when you are joking about this war and these situations, you are recalling me walking afraid of bombs and the things. And they make that joke a line, and they usually say, "Hey, ease it up." And you can ease it up because you have your experience, and it's an experience of a collective. It's all a nation who suffered, and I know I'm not the only one who get this joke. So I usually will say it with sarcasm, of how Casey says, mean that I'm so sorry that you don't know more about the country. I do apologize because you don't know more about what my country has. So that is the part. So that things when they single out because they assume you belong to something. I don't know if that was clear, but that is what Sheila brought to me, and the heart that you put there. That job always bring that trauma, that lived trauma of violence, of terror.
Yes, no, I really appreciate you sharing that with us. And it's a powerful example and it makes perfect sense. And the way you're describing it and thinking about how that person is coming at it thinking, oh, this is lighthearted, this is no big deal, this is whatever, and that it cuts you though. I mean, it cuts right to it and brings all this back up for you. I really appreciate you sharing that with us. And it sounds like you've had, having to face it so much, unfortunately, you have some tools then how to kind of navigate those situations, but you shouldn't have to be put in those situations, right? If we were more thoughtful about how we're using humor. Absolutely. Yeah, anyone else want to share? Yeah, and Keston put in the chat, sometimes by mistake, I might relate to someone so they don't feel like an outcast, but at the same time, the person or people making or doing the drop down joke, they assume you are in the same situation as the victim. Yeah, and I think again, right, thinking about those assumptions. We had in the study that we did too, somebody said people make assumptions about what your political beliefs are and then just start jumping into jokes. And they're like, I maybe believe the same or not, but that's a big assumption to just, think that we're on the same page with it. Let's see, Cheryl also put, Sheila should read the book. You'll never believe what happened to Lacey. Oh my gosh, yes. They have a couple of them out now. I don't know if folks are familiar with this, but it's like the world's greatest racist like experiences, but the way they write, they're trying to use humor to heal with it. That's a great example, Cheryl. They're hilarious. It's not funny. Racism's not funny. And the way that they're like kind of it's again like to keep the ridiculousness at bay. Like, can you believe this thing? Like that somebody thought this was appropriate to do, kind of a thing. Yeah, exactly. Anyone else, whether thinking about ways to handle or different things too?
I often think about in friendship groups when humor is used and how, depending on who you are in the group, when you came along, how those dynamics show up. It triggered me to think about how it feels, and there's not much alliance available in those moments because who's going to really step up and say that was mean, or and it's not just our age, like adults, we still have those conversations at times. And I'm just like, wow, I really never gave space for that.
No, it's such an important point, Lena. And someone in our research had mentioned how everyone then in the situation becomes like an accomplice, because then it's like you have to do something, or you're kind of co-signing, or like you're being put in these situations. And so I think it can help us having even these conversations. So like the next time it comes up, then like trying to have some language around it, or be like, kind of wondering if anyone else feels awkward about that. Like, I don't think you meant to harm anyone, but I wonder, like, we really think about what you said, like maybe that wasn't funny. Maybe there's another way that we could do this. I cannot remember. I meant to look up her name before this, but somebody, an author, she had said, when somebody says something kind of, reinforcing the isms and then says, oh, it's just a joke. She said she recommends you say, oh, I don't get it. Could you explain it to me? Could you break it down bit by bit so that I really understand what you're trying to say? And calling them out that way. Like, I want to get it. It seems funny, but okay. Let's keep going. I have another one about complicated, so we can kind of keep the conversation going here. Let me go back to the slides for a second. Okay. Okay, so humor as complicated. So let me get down to my notes. Okay, so Albus Dumbledore shared, putting oneself or others down isn't helpful or funny. However, at the same time, I cannot be solely responsible for how someone interprets my joke. It's dynamic. Discerning whether a joke is genuine, healthy, and uplifting versus unhealthy or oppressive depends upon one's intention for sharing the joke. And no one is aware of this except the person making the joke. So clear communication, asking questions is warranted. Also, if someone's feelings become hurt, then that person needs to look within their own psyche to discern why this hurts their feelings. And so again, I'm going to open it up to the group for another final time. And you're welcome to talk about anything that has come to mind throughout the workshop related to how complicated humor can be. And again, just asking that you respect everyone's truth that's been shared. And in case it's helpful, kind of thinking about a prompt to bring us back to our topic, what do you think is the role of humor in sustainability, focusing on well-being, equity, and community?
I can jump in with just a comment. I find in the work that our office does, and that the work that the Sustainability Council does at Westchester University, it can sometimes seem really heavy. We work well together. There's a sense of community and I think some shared commitment. But the climate crisis and economic inequality and attacks on democracy and mental health crises and addiction, I mean, these are all really hard things that our office and the Sustainability Council at Westchester University, we want to make some positive contributions to. And sometimes it's hard to tell how to use humor in what feel like very serious circumstances. I'm in awe of all the people who can do that really well. I sometimes feel that, you know, injecting humor is just fraught with some of these topics.
It's not like, I'm thinking about too how Casey shared the example. It's so complicated. There's so many people and personalities, and thinking about where people are coming from and how it could be interpreted. You don't want folks to think you're making light of these serious topics, but then sometimes, yeah, is there space to cope with the heaviness of it too? It's tricky. It's a great point, Brad. Let me see, we have a couple of things in the chat too. So Keston put, by sharing like you how to use humor for a good cause, and at the same time calling out people when using it negatively, right? Like kind of trying to think about the balance, keeping the goodness. And Diana said clarity can be referred to situations when that person, when the person that is going to tell a joke start, but I don't want to offend anybody. Yes, yes, like let's pump the brakes right there. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, please, Bennett.
Thanks everybody for coming and talking about humor on a Wednesday at 12:30 in the afternoon in an academic setting. That's rad. I have a lot of thoughts. I think one thought I have is just reflecting that like it's totally not sustainable that we have like a humor profession and then there's like everybody else. And you have this world where people are like often saying I'm not a very funny person, like that's why I don't express myself more freely in public, right? And that kind of breaks my heart whenever I hear that. It reminds me, I'm also a musician. It reminds me of folks who say I'm not a very creative person or something like that. And it just, to me, that always reads like our society isn't configured yet in a way to make access to these things real. And then I'm wondering, like, to what extent does our academic like disciplinarian environment actually promote humor, or does it negate it? And in what situations, in what cases, and like what kind of economies do we end up creating around or reinforcing around humor, where we end up like kind of celebrating very few individuals as like paragons of like this kind of change making that we really love, while at the same time kind of like missing the humor of the person like on our very neighborhood or on our block or whatever, who's like really holding it down for everybody, you know? And like noticing, like so much of humor for me is actually just noticing. And it's not like this like Eurocentric idea of creativity where you're like, and this is speaking as like a cis white dude who has a lot of time to think about Eurocentrism, because like that's all I got, that's the humor I got born up in, you know, is like this kind of like vision where you're like you're one of God's lonely soldiers and you're just like shot in the head with a brilliant idea and you just bring it down on reality like a genius. Like that's what creativity is, and like what jokes are. And I am so aware of the harm that's caused to me, and I see it all the time and see it reflected in the stories of other people from the ways that it impacts them. I think a more networked vision of humor is possible, where it's not just like a tool or a weapon that people make and people use individually, or like, you know, but it's also like it's ambient, it's out there. Like there are elements of like for one thing, I mean, chimpanzees laugh and dogs laugh and like everybody, you know, it's not a human thing. But also like even phenomena like racism, they are so complex and complicated that they are funny, right? There's something funny about that, not just ha, I mean also like uncanny and weird and unsettling. And if it wasn't, then there wouldn't be these economies that often predate on that funniness and turn it into something like we're talking about, something really harmful and reiterative. So I don't know, I like, that's a big like scattering of ideas, but it's so cool to be like thinking about this with y'all, and like and it's funny to do it.
No, and I appreciate you sharing your perspective and kind of, I know, right? It's like many thoughts, like processing around it and thinking about the complexities of it and like how sometimes maybe we have one intention and it lands a different way. I'm thinking about is it Archie Bunker was the character, right? And so like the idea of creating that character for folks who aren't familiar, right? Like it was like a sitcom in like the 70s and 80s, I think. And it was like a kind of a white male who was like not kind of changing with the times. And so the idea of creating this character was to poke fun at not changing with the times and staying like rooted deeply in like racist, sexist, kind of xenophobic beliefs. So they were trying to make fun of that. But some people saw this character on TV saying, see, it's okay to be like this. And so it's kind of like we can have some intention, but then what happens with that, how it's interpreted, can definitely make it complex then too, for sure. I know a lot of swirling thoughts for sure. Anyone else?
Just because.
I think what you're pointing to in that last example with Archie Bunker is the use of sarcasm. Sarcasm is a particular type of humor. And it can go right over somebody's head, or it can land deeply because there's a sense of truth about it. So I think sarcasm is part of this.
Definitely. That's a really great point, right? Because then, yeah, like you said, if it goes over the head, then it's totally taken a different way. Or the new show, Ted 2. I don't know that one.
Do you remember the teddy bear that came to life with Mark? So they did, I think it's Hulu did, and it's similar to the Archie things. It's, the creator is the creator of the Family Guy,
Yes.
and I this have this this oxymoron dichotomy of me because I'm seeing and all the isms are just there. So they set it in the 80s and they grew up in the 80s, but they are with now, and I am like this is so real. All this is so funny, but at the same time, I'm like, how I can be making fun of this? But I'm trying to think to the lenses of my education, so I can see. I don't know. It's good. It's real, but it's funny. But it's not right that it's funny. It made you think like, am I doing something wrong? I'm supposed to be advocating for this, but wow, it's real.
I'm definitely going to check it out, Diana. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, and Cheryl put Colbert's persona from back in the Colbert Report years. Yes, had the same problem as Archie Bunker's character. Some people didn't get the satire. That's true. That's another good example. Yep, where people thought, yeah, this is real. And Ashley put, my 8-year-old daughter recently said to me, Daddy is being too serious lately. He needs to laugh more. It made me think about the innocence of children, but yet that they can read into so much. Oh, that's a good point, Ashley. That is a good point. They see. We think they don't see, but they see. And all of us, right? Like, I feel like I've had moments where I'm like, man, I feel like I haven't laughed in a while. Like, what am I doing? And I think too, it's like sometimes I'm not paying attention, like Bennett was saying, to like the everyday things, and I'm not almost like letting myself like be joyous in the moment, right? It's like, what's the next thing? What's the next meeting? What's the whatever, the grade, like all the things. And it's like, whew, chill out. Like, take a minute. Like, it's okay. There's always more grading. That will always be there. Cheryl, would you argue there is never an occasion for aggressive humor? Do you mean never or ever? Would you argue that?
Make fun of dictators.
Well, yeah. Yeah. And, you know, I would point to the Koch brothers from the kind of environmental realm. You know, sometimes punching up might be necessary in order to get people's attention and to correct some problematic public behavior.
Yeah, I think definitely. And I feel like the punching up, yeah, can be a way to draw attention to it and like to have the power there. Let's see, Allison put, I was just having a conversation yesterday with a friend who was saying that she'd read that one should try not to use ironic or sarcastic humor too early when getting to know someone because it is less likely to be understood. We were both like, oops. Definitely, definitely. Yeah, and I think that, sorry, just going back really quick to Cheryl for a second, and I want to come back to that. I think that it's kind of like along the line of like canceling, right? Like trying to that speak truth to power kind of thing. Like this is not okay. It's a way to say this is not okay. The cat butt is needed. That is actually on brand for this. But I think that the only thing that I worry about with some of like the Colbert, when he did his thing and like the Daily Show and John Oliver and some of, I wonder, I think it's good. And I think sometimes we need the edutainment, right? Like sometimes we're getting good information. I wonder if it makes it too light or too entertainment. Like, does it actually help us move things forward as far as change, right? Sometimes then that can get a little bit dicey. And Allison, I wonder back to your example, I think about too that with some people, I feel like you can be in the same wavelength more quickly, or maybe that's an assumption and maybe I'm not reading it right too, and I feel like there's some people that I would never use sarcasm with because I just feel like it would never work out. Okay, and Casey put, would you say laughing at uncomfortable situations is using humor, or would you describe it as something else?
I feel like I'm often laughing when it's like totally inappropriate. I'm not sure if I'm using humor or if that is like another dynamic that has a different descriptor. It does help me cope with it, but it can be upsetting to other people. I don't know.
Yeah, Bennett, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, Casey, I get in trouble for that kind of, all the time, and like quite like catastrophically, like, and this is like trigger warning for anyone. Like, I can go into a little bit of psychiatric history from like an eagle's eye view if anybody needs like a sec around that. But like, when I've been institutionalized before in inpatient care like a decade ago, diagnosed with bipolar disorder and psychosis. And so like something that really stuck with me during that time was how ridiculous and funny and absurd so many different features of all of that were, and yet like not just in that moment, but like really at every moment of my life since then, things that I laugh at, I often have to consider, am I being surveilled right now for how I'm laughing at this? Does it seem like I don't have control of my mood or affect? Am I not in reality, consensus reality anymore for some of these features? And I have to learn who I can trust, who I feel safe around in order to be in those sort of aspects. Part of how I've tried to be safe is to be really fucking public about it and like talk about it to you all in a recorded WCU thing or write about it publicly and things like that. That's part of my relationship to disability justice, but not everybody has that privilege, right? And so then I'm like thinking about this Victor Hugo, I think it's Victor Hugo said, like only a fool laughs when something's not funny. And in French, fool is like fou, like crazy. And that has always kind of haunted me because I think the inverse is also true. Like only a fool wouldn't laugh when something is funny. And I also think everybody is crazy. Like everybody has like a really high level of foolishness about them that we're always relearning as we go through life and have a chance to be lifelong learners, hopefully. And like, to me, humor is such a huge tool and an opportunity to like stay in that zone. So yeah, I'm like, again, a little bit of a mess here, but letting that messiness be hopefully funny and also, like, the thing.
Yep. And I feel like a lot of us are nodding and relating to the messiness and like, right? So really appreciate it, Bennett. And yeah, Allison saying this all tracks, Bennett, definitely. And I think about too, just really quick, and I know we need to wrap up, like in our professions too, right? Like who's allowed to make jokes, who's allowed to be funny, like you're saying, who gets surveilled, who then is deemed unprofessional, like all of those things, who has the privilege to engage in it. And Kes said, awesome workshop, Mia. It makes me of the Sign of the Times old comedy and some people latching onto it. Like, unfortunately, your Archie Bunker example, not being able to realize or show empathy and realize their humor is actually harmful nowadays. Okay, my truth, my dad. Yes, definitely. Great discussions. Humor is one of my coping skills. Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Donna. And let me just do quick share screen. I have a concluding slide or two that just must be seen. They must be shared with the world. So just really quick, wrapping up. My hope is that folks will view humor as powerful and recognize that its use requires thoughtful precision. Humor has the beautiful potential to uplift, enhance our health and well-being, and to build sustainable community. But we also need to be mindful that humor has the potential to harm, exacerbate, or reinforce inequities and to exclude. And so I think revisiting Vivian's quote from the beginning of the workshop remains true. Humor is a contradiction. It is both simple and complicated. And please email me if you want to chat more or connect. I love talking about this stuff. Thank you, Damien. He said, great job, very informative. This was very good. Thank you so much. I'm happy to stay on another minute or two if anyone has anything that they weren't able to process yet. And otherwise, I wish everyone a great rest of the day. And again, thank you so much for joining and having this discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mia.